There we go. All right, got the YouTube running. So far, so good. Had it running fine today for the radio program, and then realized I forgot to plug the. So it was just picking up what I was talking. And we had 2 callers on the radio today. So didn't hear what they said, but got to hear what I said.
Yeah, he told me to plug in one end.
And I forgot to plug the other end.
Yeah. How dare you?
How dare you?
Yes, right.
Yes. Shame. I got the scraping fingers of shame. Is that it?
Here, have some shame.
Yes, man. I'm just in the process of sharing this over here. As soon as it does what it's supposed to do here. There we are. One more to go. Okay. There that goes. Those cookies look pretty good.
Yeah, they're definitely. They'll be there.
No, okay, January 20th, okay. Yeah, Kim just found an article and said that John Brown Gun Club is planning on being there.
Yeah, that's a misnomer too. They're taking John Brown, who's an abolitionist against slavery. They're putting his face up there so everybody thinks they're the good guys when they're not. They've taken it from the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, which those people aren't who they say they are.
Well, John Brown's kind of a mixed guy.
A question. Have you ever heard of a Proverbs 31 church?
Proverbs 31 church. Well, I don't know that I can say I've heard of a Proverbs 31 church.
There's a lot of women involved in churches.
Well, I was going to
All
ask
over.
if it had something to do with women because that's the one that talks about the virtuous woman.
Right. But I only heard one time a reference to a Proverbs 31 church. It was on the radio, I heard.
Let me Google here and see what happens. Say Proverbs 31 church.
Carol made them.
What did they say
Carol,
about
Chris
it?
was asking about your.
Well, it was a woman, of course, that was on, and she was on Bernie Sanders, Ernie Sanders. And I do that because, and she was just referencing to the fact that she was the leader of a Proverbs 31 church. But she was on, for whatever reason, she was on because she had he wanted to speak about something, but, she made a direct reference to being.
I've heard people, talk about 31 women.
I hear some blog where somebody's saying that the woman in Proverbs 31 is a personification of the church, which of course didn't exist at that time, but
I thought at that time it meant Israel.
you know,
So no direct reference, huh, to.
yeah, I entered Proverbs 31 church and I'm not finding anything. That's kind of a new one. I never,
Yeah, it stuck with me. I heard a couple weeks ago, it was on Bernie Sanders, this lady was talking.
He's been getting all kinds since he's national now.
Yes, he has.
A lot of different sort of
Yeah,
people that have a lot of different doctrine and thinking.
and he's getting a lot of negative calls too, calls to go against what he's advocating.
Yeah, I haven't heard from any of those yet, but I usually fall asleep in the first 20 minutes.
Yeah.
meeting.
I do the same thing.
As soon as that first
I
thought
try.
starts, I'm out.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
But yeah, I can't find anything specifically.
What were they passing out all the pens for?
Oh, my head.
The somber occasion
Yeah,
of,
yeah, there was no glowing going on there.
and then, so I don't know, she used a different pen for each
Each
letter,
each
her
letter.
name or something, or whatever it was. But she passed out all these pens that she used to sign these historic documents, and all these people are holding up the pens going,
I understand it wasn't more than half an hour, and one of them was already on the internet up for sale. For auction.
and then that procession through the Capitol building was the most theatrical thing as they're coming along like this.
Yeah.
Parading in silence, Most times they just tuck it under their arm and walk it over, or they send it electronically. But now it's like it's practically on a platter.
I don't know if they should have been throwing rose petals or.
I thought,
Carriage, yeah.
Yeah, you said something about a pellet.
on the radio today, I was talking about that, and I said, made me think of a wedding that I did. This little boy was going to be the ring bearer. That was funny. We do all the rehearsals. And, it says, hold your hands like this with the pillow on your hands. And then the ring is on top of the pillows. Well, fortunately, it wasn't the real ring. So does it fine in the rehearsal? I said, just go like that. When you walk down the aisle, you're holding the pillow. And when you come up in front of where I'm standing, and then I said, go stand over by the line of the groomsmen there and just stand right there, show them where to stand. And they said, just stand like this until it's time for the ring, and then just come over with the ring. So does it fine, got it down. He was kind of a precocious kid anyway, so everybody's lined up, getting ready to come in. He's got his thing and it's ready, he's all dressed up. He's got his pillow, he's holding it, and everybody sees him there, and he's set, the ring, pillow, and everything. People start going down the aisle. He's there, he disappears. He reappears a few moments later, no pillow. Nobody knows where it is. He don't know where it is. So I don't know this because I'm up in the front. And instead of seeing him come down the aisle like this, I see him come down the aisle like this. There's a serious expression on his face, just walking down the aisle. And he comes up to me and he looks at me and he goes, and then he went over and stood like this the whole time. Yeah,
There was
just-
the ring.
I just had that mental image as they were coming down there. It's like him with that thing, and I could just see him coming in and going to Mitch McConnell or something. Yeah.
They found the pillow in the bathroom. He went in the bathroom and left the pillow in the bathroom.
There was the ring.
Thankfully, the best man had the ring. So they were smart enough not to, they just had a fake ring tied to the pillow, so.
It was pretty funny.
I have some questions about Bible stories.
Mhm.
Like, Boaz and Ruth, Boaz was considered kind of a godly guy,
Mm-hmm.
and he took a woman who was not
Not Hebrew.
Hebrew,
Moabitess.
right, but she declared allegiance.
Mm-hmm.
That made a big difference, I guess.
Right. And she actually figured into the genealogy of the Lord too.
Joseph was kind of a godly guy in the picture of Christ in Egypt, but he married Egyptian women.
Right. And then
Well,
his
one
two
woman,
children,
I guess.
Manasseh and Ephraim,
Yeah,
were
but they,
Egyptian wife.
he had been, we saw a movie of the Joseph story and talked about how he was Isaac's or Israel's favorite son.
Yeah, Jacob.
Jacob's favorite son. And he wanted to give the leadership of the tribe to him because he was mad at Reuben for landing with his wife. And the other two hotheads, brothers, kind of didn't say much about Judah. But I wonder if Joseph wasn't considered part of the leading up to Jesus. Even though
Well-
he was godly in example.
Yeah, no, I've heard, it didn't come through the line of Joseph, it came through the line of his brother Judah, yeah. And,
Judah made mistakes, but he recognized his mistakes and admitted he messed up. And kind of straightened up. In fact, he came up with the idea of selling his brother into slavery to buy
Rather than
time so they
murdering him.
wouldn't kill him.
yeah, he was trying to save his life, yeah.
Right, and he made up for it by offering himself into slavery to allow the younger brother.
You know, if you think about that, that was a picture of Christ too, offering himself,
Right. He did.
you know, in our place. But,
And really, one of the things that it shows the authenticity of the Bible is the fact that all of the Bible story shows people with their problems instead of just their good points. Because if you were writing a story about somebody and you wanted to make them look good, you would just have their good stuff. You wouldn't tell all the bad stuff. But the Bible talks about people, great people that still have problems.
but it is interesting, and you see, like, somebody like Ruth, for instance, getting back to Ruth and Boaz, and also, Joseph's Egyptian wife, they, in a sense, are a picture about how we can be adopted into, God's children. You could look at it one of two ways. One way would be an example of showing about how, okay, you have the Jewish line, and then you bring a Gentile into it. And the Bible talks about how, the word was given to the Jewish people, but the Gentiles were to be brought in. And you see that reflected in the New Testament about how the Gentiles that are brought in along with the Jews and become fellow heirs. And the other way too is, if you look at it in terms of, here's the family of God, we're outside the family of God as an unsaved person. The moment we trust Christ as our Savior, we're brought in and we take his name on us. Just like Ruth took the Jewish name on her because she had married a Jewish man, but her husband died. And so she pledged her loyalty to her mother-in-law and to her mother-in-law's people, her mother-in-law's God, her mother-in-law's religion. And so she followed with that, totally identified with that. So she was brought in. And so that would be kind of like we're brought in when we,
As opposed to her
Right.
sister-in-law,
who rejected.
who went back to.
Yeah, her sister-in-law, because remember, what's her name? Ruth's mother-in-law, I can't think of her name, drawing a blank right now. But at any rate, she gives both of them the opportunity to leave. Well, I don't have any more, Naomi,
Yeah.
that's right. And she gives both of them the opportunity to leave and says, I'm not gonna have any more sons, even if I did, they're gonna be babies and you're older, you're not gonna wanna wait for them and all that. So the other one didn't hesitate to leave. But Ruth, on the other hand, said basically, your people are gonna be my people, your God's gonna be my God. I'm staying with you. And so
Whether
she
she
would be
finds
like,
a husband or not.
yeah, she was like the true believer. And of course, we know the story there. And then she became, what was it, the grandmother of David, wasn't it? Or
Great-grandmother. She
great-grandmother.
was the grandmother of Jesse.
Yeah. Because, because Boaz was Jesse's grandfather, David's great-grandfather. And then, of course, we know that the line of David down through his son Nathan comes to Mary, and down through his son Solomon, it comes to Joseph.
Right.
So Joseph being the stepfather, having legal responsibility over Jesus as a child, and Mary being the physical parent, and so having the biological line of authority, or line going back to David.
I don't know. Wondering about,
All those Sabbath breakers, by the way. They were on.
Well, and isn't it believed that Rahab became a believer?
Yeah, and she's in the line too. When we come back Sabbath breakers, it's the Sabbath now, sun's down, it's Friday night,
Mhm.
so we're keeping the Sabbath, aren't we?
Oh.
We're meeting on the Sabbath.
Well, they're breaking the Sabbath by talking on the radio.
Doing work on the Sabbath.
what I never understood is why Noah cursed Canaan for what his
Mm.
son, what his father Ham did.
Mm-hmm.
And I never understood that, and then I
Yeah,
saw the
it-
interpretation of
Yeah, it's-
why,
It's,
what it really
it's,
means to uncover nakedness.
yeah, let's go back here to Genesis chapter, is it chapter 9, maybe? Yeah, Genesis chapter 9, verse 20. It says, and Noah began to be an husbandman, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a garment, and laid it upon both their shoulders, and went backward, and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine, he knew what his younger son had done unto him, and he said, cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. And he said, blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. And this passage, yeah, it is. It's sort of a confusing, difficult to understand passage. And I had read it. Well, breaking down what happened was Noah got drunk. Basically, what's going on, and he's laying naked in his tent, and something occurred that involved certainly Ham, his one son, because Ham goes out and tells Shem, his brothers, Shem and Japheth, and they go in, and they just go in basically with a robe and covering. Well, various thoughts have come up here that there was some kind of immoral activity that took place, and that it possibly involved Canaan as well, which is why Canaan is named here. Also, it's thought that the curse was placed upon Canaan because somehow or another would implicate the father, and so if he placed it on Ham, it would implicate himself as well. But let me come back here. So just a second here. Let's see. Just a minute here. It's been a while since I looked at that. Okay, so in verse 24, it says that when Noah woke from his wine there, he slept off his drunken stupor.
I think there's an interpretation, it's on Leviticus 20:11. What Ham really did. The article talks about what he really did. Maybe it's Leviticus 20:11.
Well, Leviticus 20, verse 11, and the man that lieth with his father's wife hath uncovered his father's nakedness, both of them shall surely be put to death, their blood shall be upon them. That is, I don't know that I would say that that's what happened there, because in this particular case, there's no mention of Noah's wife, if that were that type of a setting, because it's Noah that was asleep, and it's Noah that woke up out of his drunken sleep, and it's Noah that was covered with the garment by their father. Because one could argue that going from Leviticus 20 verse 11 there, that it would be his nakedness under this here would include his wife being uncovered, laying there.
Well, this interpretation here says that maybe Ham slept like what Reuben had done.
with his mother.
That maybe Ham did what Reuben did.
Yeah. Or
Well, why would they curse the son? Because he'd be illegitimate, but that would take a long time.
yeah. So let me
Use the son.
see what else we got here.
So they curse Canaan rather than Ham. That's the same thing. Unless Canaan is determined to be illegitimate, while Ham still would be legitimate.
Now, see, this one guy is saying that Canaan went and told his dad, speculated that he went and told his father, Ham, and then Ham was, going in and looking, and they were basically making fun of him. So again, the involvement of Canaan in that. Let me see what else we got here. Give me just a minute here. Now, see, a number of the Jewish writers writing on this said that it was Canaan that first saw it and then told his father. And so Canaan and Ham both were involved here. And then it also mentions about what you said about perhaps involving his wife. Now they actually bring up another passage in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 15, that says, "Woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink, that puttest thy bottle to him, and makest him drunken also, that thou mayest look upon their nakedness." And, with the idea that perhaps they were the cause of it, in some fashion.
Could it just be too that he meted out the punishment unto him by punishing the son?
And yeah, that would be a possibility. I'm just looking here.
It sounds like Cain would be cursed, but if Ham had other kids, they wouldn't be cursed. Only Canaan was cursed. Right?
Mhm.
Oh, Cain, that was the bloodline of Cain.
Yeah, if you look in
Because
Genesis
originally-
chapter 10,
Okay.
yeah, you'll see the bloodline of Ham
Okay.
and then Canaan.
David and Bathsheba, their first son was taken by the Lord.
Okay.
But their
Yeah.
second son became Solomon and was not
Mhm.
cursed. He got the,
Yeah,
So-
Genesis 10:6, and the sons of Ham, Cush and Mizraim and Phut and Canaan. So it appears in the list there, unless there's something else that gives a little bit differently, it appears that Canaan might be the younger of them. That's not always the case, because when they give the list of the names, they don't always give the oldest one first, because I had an experience a couple of years ago where this guy was saying, "I spent 20 years trying to figure this out. Can you give me the answer? Or what do you make of it?" And it was, when had to do with Abraham and his or not Abraham, it had to do with Shem, Ham, and Japheth, who was the oldest. But it had to do with Abraham. But they said, well, Shem, however it was, they were going by the one that was listed first in the Bible had to be the oldest because he was listed first. But he's listed first because he's the most important. Shem, that's the Jewish people came through Shem. The Messiah comes through Shem. All of that. Shem is the most important because it says in Genesis 10, verse 1, now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And we know from what we just saw there in chapter 9, where we were talking about it, that we know that Ham was the, where is it? He's the younger son. He's the youngest. Verse 24, Noah woke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done unto him. So even though Ham is listed number 2 there, he's younger than Shem and Japheth. But Ham had some more importance in terms of, some of the notable enemies of God's people came through Ham and things like that.
Egyptians.
Yeah, and so Nimrod, the story of Nimrod, the Tower of Babel, and all that, and it all had to do with descendants of Ham. So we don't know for sure, just reading in Genesis 10 and verse number, where was I at there? Verse number 6, And the sons of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, and Phut, and Canaan, that necessarily Cush was the oldest. But it does deal with the sons of Cush first, and that's where Nimrod comes in, which could be why he's listed there first. Then Mizraim is dealt with next. And then,
Is it just me or is it confusing sometimes you go through the genealogies?
oh, they are, they can be very confusing.
It's hard to follow. Or Paul even says, doesn't he have a sort of a warning about that?
Well, that was people who were trying to say, well, I'm this and that because of my genealogy. And that,
Oh, I see.
Well,
Yeah.
really, yeah, that's,
but Mizraim's mentioned there, and then verse 15 says Canaan begat Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth. So in that particular case, it identifies Sidon as Canaan's firstborn. So there's something there that identifies the firstborn. But wherever Canaan was born in there, let's see.
Under Ham,
So it was Canaan.
Canaan is his youngest. Ham's youngest is Canaan. According to this list under.
Well, what I said, the list is not always given from oldest to youngest. Sometimes people who are more important, because just like in the list in Genesis 10:1, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the actual order there is probably Shem, Japheth, Ham, because Ham was the youngest, but he's listed in the middle there. So you can't always go by now we tend to order our children from oldest to youngest, generally speaking. But they list them generally speaking. It may be oldest to youngest, or it may be most important first. And hence, Japheth being listed first, or I'm sorry, Shem being listed first because he was the most important. But basically, I'm getting at, we can't always go by what's listed there as the birth order. And, but whatever the case is, Ham was the youngest of Noah's 3 sons. And Canaan, whatever it is, must have been involved for the curse to be, and he didn't say cursed be Mizraim, because Mizraim was one of Ham's sons. And he didn't say, cursed be Phut or cursed be Cush. He specifically said cursed be Canaan. So that's why people believe that Canaan was involved somehow, some way. Because if the idea was, well, if you curse the son, it goes back on the father, so he didn't want to curse Ham because it would go back on himself. Well, that wouldn't make sense, because he could have just as easily said, cursed be Mizraim, or cursed be Phut, or cursed be, any of them. So, of course, one would say, well, then he just happened to pick Canaan. But generally speaking, the name is picked because there's a reason.
In verse 24, could, where it says, and knew what his, could that word is there be referring?
Canaan's son,
Be referring to,
or I mean Ham's son.
Right.
Well, in the context, I think it is referring to Noah. I mean, to Noah's son.
Noah's son, young.
Yeah. But regardless of that, the fact that he cursed Canaan implies that his son was involved. And so therefore, there was no sense of a curse being spoken upon, Mizraim or Phut or, any of the other ones, because it was Canaan that was involved. And then there's been some people who have said, well, Canaan's name became synonymous for Ham. It became synonymous for the whole family. And one of the reasons they say that is in verse 26 there, in verse 25, it said, cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. And so they're saying the descendants of Ham in particular, all of them are collected under this. And God, and then he continues, blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. And God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. And so they're saying that's synonymous to all of the descendants of Ham. Canaan's name became synonymous with his father. And but the curse, if the curse is placed upon Canaan, the grandson, then this is exempting Ham's other sons and descendants that way to only this line. And that would make sense if Canaan was involved. Why would the other sons be cursed? Why would their descendants be cursed? They had nothing to do with it. Now, if Canaan's name became synonymous with Ham, and Ham, there's a reference to Ham in general, then you can see that, but there's no reason for really the other sons of Ham to be implicated. Let me see here. Let's go back a little bit further, go a little further on this one here. Yeah, and just reading a couple more things, and again, coming back to this again several times, the idea that it was Ham and his son Canaan that were involved. And hence the curse was placed upon Canaan's descendants, Canaan and his descendants. And of course, like somebody had mentioned, Ham saw this as well, and saw what it cost his son in that sense. But really, the Bible does not directly tell us exactly what happened. It just gives a bit of this. Certainly, it's a warning against drunkenness, and I think when that one that tied it in with over there in what was it, Habakkuk, I think it was, about cursed be the one that gets his neighbor drunk to look at his nakedness and things like that. And then, of course, with what you brought up about the, talking about the wife, that's a potential.
People do things they wouldn't normally when they're not in a clear state of mind.
Oh, yeah. And then, of course, when they passed out, because that was the case here with Noah, he was passed out.
Right. I know, I was looking for that verse you were talking about with Paul, not the word genealogy.
That's in Titus.
It's in Titus?
I found that Titus 3:9 says, "But avoid foolish questions and genealogies and contentions and strivings about the law, for they are unprofitable and vain." Explaining to Titus about But it's true, I think we can get caught up in looking at stuff that is vain regarding salvation, but it is interesting to note and understand and discover these truths about these matters.
Also create cliques, divisions,
It can,
and
create a lot of stuff that has nothing to do with
roots of
salvation.
pride, or which is all contrary.
Now, I have a question. If he was passed out, does that mean that this was not his first time drinking?
Well, he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine and was drunken. So he planted a vineyard, which means that it took time for that to grow, and it took time for him to, to get the first grapes, the first vintage, second vintage, et cetera. And over time, well, of course, they would have pressed the grapes out, and then, of course, in their time frame, you would have taken the grape juice, and that would have been called wine. That gets into another discussion entirely too, when you look at the word wine, it's really only relatively recently, in the last couple hundred years, that wine has come to refer only to fermented drink, a fermented drink. Wine in the 1600s, wine before that referred to basically fruit juice. So you have wine was the juice of the grape. New wine was freshly pressed out grape juice. That's new wine. It's not had a chance to age. It's just freshly pressed. It's freshly squeezed. You get some grapes, bring them in, squeeze out the juice. There's even a reference, I think, about the wine that's yet in the grape. Means the juice inside the grape, certainly not fermented yet.
What you just said here tonight would have caused an argument someplace.
I know. But so the word wine, this is just the historical use of the word. And part of it makes sense because at what point does grape juice become fermented wine?
Oh, in the yeast.
Yeah, well, you
Sugar breaks down in
put,
the
yeah,
yeast,
you
yeah.
remember the wine skins. What was the wine skin? They took the skin of the animal and they basically, they took it off and they turned it inside, and, and they where the legs were, they sealed those off. That's the bottles that are talked about in the scripture. Remember, there's a passage about not putting new wine in old bottles. The reason is this. An old bottle was a wine skin that's already stretched out. They weren't talking about glass bottles, or they were talking about a wine skin. And the skin, when you put the new wine in, not putting new wine in old bottles, because when you put the new wine, you put it in a new bottle, because the old bottle's all stretched out. So you put the new wine in the new bottle. So now you got this wine skin full of grape juice, and you throw it on the back of your camel and you head off across the desert, and it's sloshing back and forth and it's warm and it's not pasteurized. So what does it do?
Ferments.
And the wine skin does what?
Stretches.
It starts to get bigger. That's why you put new wine in new wine skins, because as it begins to ferment. So at what point does it start fermenting? In all actuality,
Probably
if
be
the
less than
yeast,
140 degrees.
no,
or
if
something.
the yeast is present, it'll begin fermenting immediately. And if you ever make bread or something where you use yeast, how long does it take the yeast to begin to ferment? In fact, they tell you, don't let the yeast get in touch with the water before you're ready to mix it up. I have this bread machine, and you put in your water and your wet ingredients, and then you put the dry ingredients, and you're supposed to make a little depression in the top of the flour and put the yeast in there, don't let it get in the water, because if it gets in the water, it'll start working immediately. And they want there to be a little delay before it gets into the water. They want to give it a chance to get mixed in with the flour more before it gets activated. So the heat makes it work faster. And there's an optimal temperature range.
I think it was like 140
Yeah.
degrees.
So that optimal temperature range helps the yeast to metabolize the sugars in the grape juice. And so that begins happening immediately in the presence of yeast. Well, what happens is in the yeast, they bring the sugar in, and there's a thing called the Krebs cycle, which inside of our cells, we have they call them organelles called mitochondria, and they're kind of like the energy plant in the cell. And the mitochondria, what it does is it takes sugar in, and essentially it goes through this process called the Krebs cycle, which produces energy that the cell can use to do stuff. That's why it's called the energy factor. Well, in the Krebs cycle, as it cycles through this thing, it at one point, it gives off in us lactic acid, which is why when you run and your legs start burning, that's lactic acid is building up faster than your body can metabolize it or move it away. But in yeast, at the point where our body makes lactic acid, instead of going in the lactic acid route, it makes a little bit of a detour and it makes alcohol. It's probably a good thing it makes that detour. Imagine how many people become addicted to running. Yeah, the more you ran, the drunker you got. It's an awful good thing that God in his wisdom made the Krebs cycle in animals, in higher animals go into lactic acid. Lactic acid doesn't make you drunk, it just makes you uncomfortable. But yeast, the same cycle, instead of producing lactic acid, produces alcohol. And so it produces alcohol, and as a consequence, the alcohol, is in there, and at the same time it produces carbon dioxide, which is why it swells. So alcohol and carbon dioxide are given off because it takes the carbohydrates. You got carbon, you got oxygen, you got hydrogen, and it's pulling them off, and the carbon and the oxygen are going off this way, and then the lactic acid is going off this way, and I forget the chemical makeup of lactic acid, and alcohol is. I don't have it's I used to have to know those things, but I don't.
So then at his first miracle then at the wedding,
He made new wine. He made new wine. Cause see, so you had, okay, let's say this is the wine pot, and it's filled with grape juice, and you put a cover over it, and it sits there. Are they gonna drink all that today? No, it might be a week. Actually, if they think they're gonna keep it longer, what they would do is they boil it down. So instead of being up here, they boil it down to where it might be a 20th or a 10th the size of what it was, sometimes even more. It becomes a thick syrup. That thick syrup was still called wine. They would take that thick syrup and they would get some water, and they would put the water into a pot, and they would put some of that syrup into the water, and they would mingle their wine. They would stir it up. And they called the resulting mixture wine.
Just like getting the frozen can out of the.
Exactly. They would have called that frozen can wine. And so they mixed it up. Now, let's say that they didn't boil it down. They just put a lid on it. They came back a week later, they popped the lid off, and it was warm that week, and it went and released a lot of carbon dioxide, and they tasted it, and they said, this tastes a little different than it did before. And then they cover it back up, and they go away for another week or two, and they come back, and they take the lid off, and and they taste it's a little bit different. And then they start to notice that it's now alcoholic, and they call that strong wine. That's why it's called strong, because it has an effect on you. And so people who tarry much at the wine, let's say you got it when it wasn't very fermented, but there's a little bit of alcohol in there. It's just that at some point, the alcohol is not detectable or noticeable. You drink it and any of it's metabolized before it can affect you. But at some point, the alcohol level gets high enough
It becomes a
that
toxin.
it you can't metabolize it fast enough, and it gets you drunk. And so those that tarry long at the wine.
Well, this is a good point, because through the years, a lot of different Christian groups and people, they go and say, well, Jesus drank wine. They just read that, and they don't get that history that you just laid out, in that everything was called wine until recently. And I have read in here where it does make a lot of mention to new wine and strong wine.
Well, those mention strong drink, right?
Strong drink, yeah.
Because then they distill
I think I even.
alcohol back in the.
Too.
I think they found evidence of beer being made by the ancient Egyptians.
Okay.
But
It's really in the same family.
Yeah,
because
but if you had a pot of grape juice sitting there for a week or so, and you went and opened it up and you mix that in with some water, they would still call that wine. But a lot of times they do that because if the water tastes bad, you mix that in there, it makes it taste better.
Do you think too?
And you're getting nominal amount of alcohol, but it's not making anybody drunk. So the difference is they weren't they weren't brewing or making wine specifically to make alcoholic wine. It's just that grape juice was such an important part of their diet, or however you want to put it, because it was just such an important commodity. And then, of course, some people then realized, hey, if I do this just right, I can get a nice buzz off from that pot of wine over there. And so there were some people who did try to make it that way. And then over time, they began producing wine expressly for the purpose of alcoholic beverages.
Well, unpasteurized apple cider will do the same
Yeah,
thing.
if you get unpasteurized apple, and we had this one happen one time. We had a plastic jug, and it was sitting in the kitchen on the shelf, I think it was, or something. And we went somewhere for about a week, or on the back porch. And we went somewhere for about a week and forgot to put it in the refrigerator. We came back, and the carton was all swollen up. It was about ready to burst. And I opened the lid, and it smelled like a brewery. And I said, well, I don't think this is past the sanctification test anymore.
Well, when you took the lid off, it went, poof.
As I said, it smelled like a brewery. So actually,
Bootlegging.
so what we did, we actually let it turn into vinegar, because if you let it go far enough,
His
Yes.
ancestors had some bigger, so.
yeah.
Well,
Well,
apple cider vinegar's good.
Well, yeah, so I said, if you let it go far enough, the alcohols will eventually be transformed into acetic acid, and it becomes vinegar.
Oh.
See, now it's no longer alcoholic, but that's the process it goes through. Now, in some cases, depending, you brought up the temperature range, there's a temperature range where when you put the wine or the grape juice there, in this temperature range, in a certain temperature range, it will not become alcoholic. It'll go directly to acetic acid, and it will become vinegar directly. So it's possible to bypass the alcoholic phase and go directly to vinegar. But it's just like, have you ever seen some of these shows where they, they're talking about valuing things, and they'll have like, well, here's this rare bottle of wine. It's 150 years old, and they're going to sample it, but they don't know whether it's going to, have turned to vinegar or something by now. And then they'll sample it, and they'll say, well, it's vinegar, because sometimes it will. It goes beyond the alcohol stage and becomes vinegar.
On the cross, was Jesus offered strong drink?
Vinegar, he was offered vinegar and what was it, hyssop, yeah. And the hyssop and the vinegar together had a mildly numbing effect or something like that. It was like a small vestige of
Well, yeah, hyssop is
humanity.
actually, I think they even still use it up almost in the modern times for surgery, and you're right,
Yeah,
had some.
well, it's just like in Samoa, in the South Pacific, they used kava, because kava had, they would always say, well, people who use kava, it makes their skin dark. Well, it made their skin dark because it would kind of numb them to the effects of working in the sun, and they could go out, work in the tropical sun longer without saying, man, this is just too hot today. It's just too much sun. And so they're out in the sun longer. That's why their skin got darker. So they would say, well, the kava makes your skin darker. Well, no, it didn't. What it did is it, in sufficient quantities, it gave sort of a numbing effect that, and there's a lot of plants like that.
Yeah,
It's
it's like
just,
St. John's wort, if you take too much of that, it'll make you sensitive to ultraviolet light.
well, and nutmeg, they don't let nutmeg out too much in the prison, because you take a substantial quantity of nutmeg, it has a marijuana-like high effect on people. So, a little
I've
nutmeg
heard
in your
something.
eggnog.
What about aloe? They say the aloe plant has a lot of good things for it.
But I also hear it's toxic too. It's in certain
How?
degrees. It can be.
Well, there's certain varieties of aloe too that have, and too much of anything can, too much oxygen is toxic. Too much water is definitely toxic.
Like we're talking with the peppers, it's,
Yeah.
cactuses have capsaicin in them.
Really?
Yes. So I mean, it's just,
I really like hot peppers.
You like hot peppers?
Well, they're good.
I'll see if I can start you some Carolina Reapers.
Yay!
What kind of brand, what kind of pepper is that?
It's like 3 or 4 million Scoville units.
Okay.
Ooh, that's up there.
I gotta start them put there.
What's the flavor though? Is it a good flavor?
There is no flavor, you just put it in your mouth.
It's just heat.
It's
No, I like the flavor.
your mouth froths and it's like a burning sensation and everything.
He has a blowtorch to cool his
I'm
tongue
not
down
into
with.
it.
Oh, that feels good.
All I can tell you is it numbs sciatic nerve pain after a while.
How's that working with the turmeric, golden paste?
Works pretty good, just to put in your coffee in the morning. It's extremely, it's two burns. You get the physical burn from the coffee and then you get the chemical burn from the pepper. But it does have a property though where it does help the inflammation. When getting off topic, I
I was
guess.
gonna say, there are a lot of things that, when you do too much parsley, has, some alkaloids, I think, it's in it, and if you put way too much parsley and stuff, you can, especially if you're sensitive to it.
But now that you're saying, yeah, he didn't take anything on the cross, nothing to relieve the pain, because of the full punishment of our sin. It's interesting, look at that.
I had a question that Daniel asked her.
Mhm.
A couple weeks ago, we started looking at that, so it got me to read. I was looking at that angel,
Which chapter?
let's see, maybe it's.
You're talking about the one that took 3 weeks to get to him?
Yeah, the one that
Chapter
was,
10?
had the very much appearance of the Lord in a lot of ways. But certainly it wasn't the Lord, because the Lord wouldn't need help from Michael.
Right, and he says he was sent by the Lord.
Yeah, chapter 10, yeah. I think starting in verse 10, I think, or,
No, verse 7.
oh, yeah.
Or no, verse, no, verse 6.
It kind of starts at verse
Yeah.
4, 5, and 6.
4, yeah, verse 4. Well, and technically it did start in verse 2 there, where he was in mourning for 3 full weeks.
Yeah.
And that's where the angel comes. And yeah, he has, in verse number 6, it says, his body also is like the beryl, and his face as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms and his feet like in color to polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. Okay, now you look at that and you hold your finger there and go to Revelation chapter 1 and 2, I believe. Chapter 1. And okay, in Revelation chapter 1, verse 12, and he says, and I turned to see the voice that spake with me, and being turned, I saw 7 golden candlesticks. And in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about the path with a golden girdle. His head and his hairs were white like wool, and as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. And so a lot of similarities there. But at the same point, we know that he sees this one here, very similar, But it's very clear that this angel, there, this one that he's seeing, was held up let's see, verse number 12, where he says, he said unto me, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that thou didst set thine heart to understand and to chasten thyself before thy God, thy words were heard, and I am come for thy words. But the the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. But lo, Michael, one of the chief priests or princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. And so, he basically talks about how Michael, the archangel, had to help him. And like you said, you don't see Jesus needing Michael's help to withstand the prince of the of Persia there. And let's see.
And then,
When then he talks about he's going back to the fight there.
right,
So that would indicate that this is an angel, but the angels, Michael the archangel, is a pretty powerful, imposing figure.
right.
And so the similarities between that of Christ, the feet and everything like brass, and the sound, the loud, powerful voice. Revelation says the voice, the sound of many waters, and here in Daniel chapter 10, it has a sound like the voice of a multitude, a large group of people. But an angel is a powerful being, and we understand that right now the Bible says we're made a little lower than angels, but in the future we will have power over angels. We don't have that power now. So the fallen angels, they're angels, so they're powerful beings, and we should not think that we have greater power than them currently, because we're in a very limited state of existence. And so even the lesser of the angels, whether holy or fallen, are probably more powerful than the most powerful of human beings. And when we look at that, and in fact, in the Hebrews chapter 1 here, I think it is, chapter 2. Hebrews chapter 2, it says, Hebrews chapter 2, verse number 9, it says, but we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he by the grace of God should taste death for every man. So he took on a form that was lesser than the angels. In fact, if you look back up, verse number 6 says, but one in a certain place testified, saying, what is man that thou art mindful of him, or the son of man that thou visitest him? Thou madest, talking about man, thou madest him a little lower than the angels. Thou crowned him with with glory and honor, and did set him over the works of thy hands. Thou hast put all things in subjection under his feet, for in that he put all in subjection under him, you left nothing that is not put under him. But now we see not yet all things put under him. Then it goes into talk about Jesus. And I believe there's a reference here back to, let me see, Psalm 8. Let's see here. Let's see, Psalm 8, and it says starting in verse 3, when I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained. Verse 4, what is man that thou art mindful of him, and the son of man that thou visitest him? For thou hast made him a little lower than the angels, and hast crowned him with glory and honor. And so again, we see that reference here, Psalm 8. And Psalm 8 verse 5, again, there's that idea that human beings, mankind is made a little lower than the angels. And that's reflected there in Hebrews chapter 2. We're made a little lower than the angels. And so Jesus took on a form lower than angels. Well, we're made lower than angels in terms of our ability and everything. Why would we think that we can tangle with them effectively? That one angel, the Lord, remember, defeated the entire Assyrian army, thousands of people in one night.
Also, it says in Ephesians 6, put on the full armor of God, because
Yeah.
They're a powerful enemy.
yeah, you're capable of falling for.
Yeah, and we know that there's different orders of angels, and some of them more powerful than others. The one in Daniel chapter 10, for instance, was in a battle with the prince of Persia for 3 weeks until Michael came, who was a greater angel and assisted him in his battle. But even Michael, the archangel, it says in the little book of Jude, he would not argue with the devil because they fought over Moses' body.
Yeah,
He said, the Lord rebuke you.
Yeah.
Is it referring to that Prince of Persia, is that referring to a fallen angel?
Yes. And that ties in with what Paul wrote in Ephesians 6 about wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against, he talks about the spiritual wickedness, the powers and principalities and spiritual wickedness in high places. So that's examples of that. These demonic, we call them demons, devils, devilish, demonic, whatever you want to say, powers that operate behind things. So here's an example, and I was trying to bring this out a little bit on the radio today, but I had a short time because of that. Well, yeah, follow this. Here's President Trump, who is arguably one of the most beneficial presidents that we've had in terms of Christian liberties. Yesterday was the National Religious Freedom Day, and if my thing here would actually show me the thing, I could read this thing to you that he said. I got a quote on here. Give me a moment here for it to load. Here it is.
President Trump yesterday, right?
Well, yeah, this would be yesterday. He said, we will not let anyone push God from the public square. This is a statement that he made. And he also got behind, there's some stuff going on right now to open up schools, public schools, to be able to have prayer in public schools, or at least not prohibit students and teachers that want to, whether or not, maybe not official school prayer, but students and teachers and all would be able to engage in prayer in public schools and things like that. I mean, that's a great thing. Plus, look at the things he's done for the unborn children. The pro-life issues that he's championed. And so he's one of the most pro-life presidents we've ever had. And then look how he's championed the Jewish people and the nation of Israel. Recognizing Jerusalem as the capital city of Israel, recognize the sovereignty of Israel over the Golan Heights and the West Bank, moving the embassy over to from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. All of these things, and these are things that he's doing that's supporting God's plan and God's people in all these areas. And so if when we read in Ephesians 6 about the spiritual battle and spiritual wickedness in high places, we see from that in Daniel that there are holy angels that are fighting on behalf of getting the Lord's work done, and there's unholy angels that are fighting, trying to oppose God's work. So why, even with the idea that they're robbed from what they thought was what they were going to get, which was President Hillary Clinton, and all of their plans were going to come to fruition, and now they see it unraveled every day. Other than the anger that they have there, where does this anger come from? Well, there's a spiritual battle going. And we had in the previous administration a clamping down on religious freedoms in this country. Now we have an opening up of religious freedom in this country.
Well, I think with the previous administration, people were afraid to talk.
Well, yeah, and as I
I mean,
said on the radio,
I mean, and what the sad thing was, is a lot of Christians wouldn't voice themselves during a period, but
Mhm.
now they do.
they were
Yeah.
afraid what might happen.
Right.
And then you had even pastors say, oh, I can't say anything, Johnson's amendment, Johnson amendment, I'll get in trouble. It's not legal for me. No, it's perfectly legal. And so you had this fear that was being caused. And when the Clintons were in office before, there was a lot of crackdowns. I mean, Bill Clinton did sign a few pieces like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, I think it was. And kind of that was signed for political reasons on his part. But there were a lot of things that happened during his administration that cracked down and restricted Christian freedoms in this country. And so that the spiritual entities that are behind the scenes on the unholy side are trying to prevent Christian liberties from being recognized in this country, trying to prevent the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, trying to prevent restricting abortion efforts in this country. And so you look at these people who are attacking President Trump, it's not that they're merely attacking him, they don't like him, they don't like the fact that he's there and Hillary's not there. There's a spiritual battle going on. The devil does not like what he's doing, and he's raising up opposition against him. And this is why it's important for us to do what Paul told Timothy in, I think it's 1 Timothy chapter 2. I'm trying to remember, this is the verse I used earlier today. Yeah, where he said in 1 Timothy 2, verse 1 and 2, where he said, I exhort therefore that first of all, supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings and for all that are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. And so we need to pray for President Trump and for the Congress and the courts that we'll have the freedom and the ability to lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty, so that we can go out and proclaim the gospel and live for Christ in the world around us. But the devil, by the same token, doesn't want that to happen. So the fallen angels, the unholy angels, are working hard to keep this from happening. And see, that's going back to Daniel chapter 10, that's what was going on there. There was the prince of Persia, which was an unholy angel, a fallen angel, that was trying to prevent God's work from going forward. And when this holy angel came with a message from God, he came into the territory of this one and ran into opposition. And he was fought against so that he could get through. Daniel, meanwhile, knows nothing of this, and he's praying. And his prayers are answered in God sending Michael, the archangel, to go to his assistance and break through the logjam.
Yeah, I believe the prayers were answered instantaneously. It was just,
Yeah, he was dispatched immediately. But as he kept praying, well, why didn't God just do it immediately? Well, the Bible says it pleased God by the foolishness of men that he has us go out and preach the gospel. I mean, he could just make everybody hear the gospel message immediately if he wanted to, but he chooses to work through us, and he chooses to work through angels. And he worked through these angels, and of course, because he's working through the angels, they're being opposed by the fallen angels. And so we need to pray one for another. We need to pray for those that are in authority. We need to pray that God's servants get through. I'm talking about the heavenly angels, and to do the things that God sends them for. And you know, in this case right here, there are certainly ungodly elements, fallen angels assisting people trying to attack President Trump precisely because he's doing so much good. And the devil does not want that done.
Well, if you sit there and you analyze Obama's administration and what he did to the country, you had literally like over 100 million people who were, non-participant in the jobs pool.
Yeah, about a third of the population.
Yeah,
Well, some people just gave up because.
Yeah, they took people off the unemployment rolls.
That's how they
It
kept the
was
numbers.
actually
right.
higher than what it was because the people who stopped looking, they took them off the roll.
yeah.
And,
And all their 57 states, by the way.
which coincidentally, there are 57 Muslim states.
Yes.
Not saying that he was a Muslim, but
Did he
looks
say
like a
that
Muslim.
I don't think that
quacks
was
like
an
a
accident.
Muslim.
What's that?
Looks
Yeah.
like a Muslim, quacks like a Muslim.
I don't think that was an accident when he said that. I think it was just.
Didn't he say the word by Muslim place?
Yeah, until he was corrected by Stephanopoulos, like, you mean your Christian faith? Oh, yeah, my Christian faith.
Remember how he said Pakistan?
Pakistan. Pakistan.
Yeah.
In Pakistan.
There's no American that says it like that.
Everybody copied it after he started. though.
Pakistan.
All the news
Yeah.
involved.
Oh, Pakistan.
Well, because the news is owned by Satan himself, so.
Well, and he did what any Muslim leader would do. He bowed to the king of Saudi Arabia as the keeper of Mecca, guardian of Mecca.
All right, I forgot about that.
And then he
Just
told,
for a year.
was that Rabin, made him leave by the back door.
Yeah. Well, then he abandoned Netanyahu in the White House. He just said, "Oh, I'm going to lunch." And he left and never come back. He just abandoned him.
And yet, like I said,
Well, if you look, it's like Obama was so anti-Christ, it's like, cause he,
well,
hit all the crosses and everything, and
well,
look
remember,
how-
who was it that, the Catholic school, they says, what touched down Jesus, what was that? They made him,
Notre Dame.
Notre Dame, that's what it was, thank you, they covered it,
mhm.
and that's ridiculous.
Well, they did that at Georgetown, the crosses in the chapel. And that's not the only places that they did it. And, what was it?
Well, yeah, it was, you're saying the Washington Monument, or was it, no, it's no.
Oh, the Washington Monument, when they were doing that, they moved display cases in front of obscuring the view of verses that are carved into the walls. Then you had on more than one occasion when when Obama was looking at the teleprompter and he's reading from the Declaration of Independence, and he would say, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed, and then he would go, with certain unalienable rights. When he was glowering was that they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable, and he would
Well, he
refuse
was,
to say that.
the
He would
pledge,
just,
he was leaving it under God in the pledge.
yeah, and he was also at some times, I think, not even putting his hand over his heart when they were doing things, and so that's what I'm saying. During that time, we had essentially the unholy angels were having a great deal of success. And thankfully,
That's
people
why,
were
the economics of the country went downhill,
Mhm.
Well, honestly,
crime went up.
we actually deserved Obama, I mean, we still do.
Yeah,
It's
Yes,
just,
because we had turned away from him, and Christians didn't get out and vote.
unfortunately,
And-
sometimes what it does, though, when you have somebody like Obama, it strengthens people, and resolve, and then.
Well, yeah, if we'd have had
Opens eyes.
if we'd had a McCain presidency or a Romney presidency, we'd have never had a Trump presidency.
It's true.
And, but, we do still need to pray, and we can't just coast, because, evangelical Christians, and when I say evangelical, we're lumping in Bible-believing Christian fundamentalists and all with them. We make up the single greatest constituency of voters, but we also make up the constituency that's the least likely to vote. If evangelical Christians simply turned out and voted in the fall, it would be a landslide to reelect
Well,
President
let's just
Trump.
say if they voted for
If they
Trump.
voted for President Trump,
Look at
it would be a
Romney.
landslide.
I can't vote for Romney because he's a Mormon. Well,
And I can't vote for Trump because he made rude comments.
It's like,
And,
Are you
and
kidding
Hillary
me?
didn't.
you want 4 more years of this? It's like.
Oh, I know. I mean, the same people who were saying that would have voted for somebody who was Catholic.
Yeah, no, that was Cruz, right?
No, Cruz isn't Catholic.
No.
I think that was,
Kennedy was there.
yeah. But who was it that was running that was Catholic? Rubio.
Oh, okay.
But he dropped out earlier on.
Well, your comment reminded me, because Daniel again, when he does that prayer in chapter 9, he, in verse 5, he says, we have sinned, we have committed iniquity, we have done wickedly, have rebelled, even by departing from thy precepts and thy judgments. Neither have we hearkened unto thy servants, the prophets who spake in thy name, who are kings or princes and their fathers, and to all the people of the land. He goes on and on and on confessing all these things. And it's like, you're right, that's exactly what we all deserve too.
Well, I mean, it's also, we're too prosperous too sometimes in the country to forget God. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. Well, you see the nature of Israel in the book of Judges. They would get comfortable, they would get at ease in Zion, and they'd forget God.
And when you look at it, you can go and order something on Amazon, have it sometimes in the next day. You have ease for anything.
But these Israelites are, they're enslaved. You know, and that's where we're headed. Without Trump at the moment.
All right.
Well, and see that again, having President Obama caused Christians to start praying and get their hearts right with God, and then get up and go out and do something. And, you know, so here's the real danger now. We get at ease in Zion, and we say, oh, Trump's in, he's done this, we've got Christian liberties, they're restricting abortions. I'll just kick back and coast.
Plus the problem, though,
Forget God.
they don't vote. They won't even get out, and
Well, it's just amazing how
People
many
came out in
churches.
2016,
well, they did, right,
Yeah.
because
and they will come out in
And that's-
2020. I don't doubt it.
Yeah, well, and see, we need to, in a sense, we need to, you know, work and pray as if they're not gonna come out, and then hope and have, you know, the belief that they will come out.
That's why I think, how crazy the Democrats are acting right now, that's a good thing.
Oh,
As scary as it is, but you see who they are and what they're willing to go to do to injure somebody.
Well, when you look at in 2016, when they put together, it's gonna be interesting to see how they do their platform this year, because in 2016, when you see how they put together their platform that purposely excluded God
Yep.
and purposely stood for abortion and same-sex marriage and just every anti-Bible position that you can imagine, they put it in their platform.
I don't see how a Christian, a Bible-believing Christian, can vote for a Democrat.
There are plenty of people out there that claim that they were.
It's
And,
just-
and I can go online to church websites and blogs of
I know
pastors
people
that are adamant that they can't support Trump, then they'll vote for a Democrat.
I think a lot of them are a couple different things. Maybe rhinos, number one, or two, they're you know, they're babes. They don't really have a lot of
Yeah, they
understanding
don't know.
about the
Yeah.
book. They just know that they trust the Lord for salvation, but they really don't know a lot.
Well, I
about-
think a lot of it's priorities too. You know, they don't see, you know, well, I'm a Democrat and my union is telling me to vote for the Democrat.
They don't look below the surface.
Did
They
anybody
just-
catch the Jeopardy question?
I heard that there was
Oh, I heard
something
about
out there,
it,
but I
but
didn't
I-
catch it.
What perfect example of what you're talking about.
What's Jeopardy?
Question was, who was this congressman from California, and they showed a picture of Schiff up there. Nobody could answer the question.
That shows how much people are paying
So,
attention
just,
to the impeachment
When
proceedings.
did this happen?
Just the other day.
On that show, that
On
you showed
Jeopardy.
And he's been all
Nobody
over,
knew that it was Schiff. Nobody hit the button.
he was all over the news in December.
It has been for
And
months.
then
for
he
years
was
straight.
right there in that group that was, carting the impeachment papers over.
And they made him one of the prosecutors, so he wouldn't be questioned about.
Well, there's still some debate on that.
I wouldn't call him a prosecutor, I'm gonna call him a persecutor.
Yeah, and
I mean,
Yeah.
it's,
that's like when the 9/11 commission got together and who was it that said, here's a memo from Jimmy Gorelick. It was given to the FBI and the CIA and everybody else that you cannot cross-check each other's information on who you're dealing with.
what, you think about this, like it says now, well, there's been a lot of talk about polarization in the country, but, and God says that, he says he'd rather have somebody hot or cold.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
You think this polarization could be part of his hand?
Yeah, I would say he's letting it happen because as people get more polarized, Christians become hot, they become more, active and trying to be salt and light.
And
But-
start speaking up, saying this is what
Yeah.
you're doing wrong and this is why these things are happening.
And as the non-Christians and anti-Christians become more cold, so to speak, they begin opposing, and so they become more well-known. Because a lot of
Sometimes,
times,
like, fall by the wayside, essentially. Because the situations of polarization would help somebody determine if they're a Christian or non-Christian.
yeah, but we do know that from Revelation 3 there, that in the latter days, a lot of the church is going to become lukewarm. And so we are seeing that because we see the polarization in society, but a lot of churches really, they're just lukewarm.
Happy clappy churches.
Yeah, they don't know what's going on.
I was listening to Rasnackle last night talking about that with somebody that apostatizes, wasn't really saved.
Yeah, they
They've
fall
heard-
away from the knowledge of the
They've
truth.
fallen away from the knowledge of the truth, right, but they weren't.
Yeah.
It was a good thing, he had a good message on that.
Mhm.
But I think like the lukewarm church, that's the apostate church.
Yeah. Well, and you have a lot of churches today that are composed of, unsaved church members led by unsaved pastors and unsaved deacons.
That one church down the road from here, you said that guy's not even a minister. He's a good speaker or something like that.
Well, no, the United Church of Christ, he's not saved. He doesn't believe the gospel.
I mean,
As far as the state's concerned, he is.
Yeah, I mean,
But
he
it's-
is a licensed ordained minister and, and all that sort of stuff in the state's eyes and in the United Church of Christ's eyes. But he doesn't, I listened to him online one time, basically holding up a Bible tract and saying, oh, you'll probably see one of these in a restroom in a gas station somewhere. Maybe you've seen one laying around. And I'm thinking, well, no, we do that. and he's in the area, so maybe it was one of ours. And he went through it, and I told you that we're all sinners, and Jesus died on the cross to pay for our sins. If you pray this prayer, your sins will be forgiven, and you'll be a Christian. He said, oh, well, I don't really disagree with anything that's in it. And then he went on to disagree with everything that was in it. And talk about how that's just a pie in the sky form of Christianity that's of no earthly good. And that's what he said, of no earthly good. It's pie in the sky Christianity, no earthly good, and a few other things. And basically went on to say, you're a real Christian. And he went to Matthew 25, which actually applies during the tribulation period, and it applies to nations, people groups, not, principles we should go by as well. But when he basically said they were involved in some shoebox campaign of putting items in a shoebox to give to these immigrants that were coming over into the North Hill area of Akron, Muslim immigrants. And he said, if you put together one of these shoeboxes and give it to one of these people, now you know you're a real Christian. So becoming a Christian, actually in his eyes, was not praying and confessing your sin to God and believing that Jesus died on the cross to pay for our sin with his blood. That's not Christianity. Christianity is packing a shoebox and giving it to somebody in love.
Yeah,
then,
that's what Samaritan's Purse does.
well, yeah, and that's what a lot of these groups do. Now,
And there's nothing
Should
wrong with
we-
doing that.
yeah,
but
should
that's
we
not
do
to
these
be
things?
a-
Absolutely. but that's not what gets us saved, because it's just like there's a group that's down, they're headquartered in either Biloxi or Gulfport, Mississippi. I'm trying to think of it. Beams is the name, Beams. Something, at any rate, it's a ministry, but one of the things that they do is they put together shoe boxes. And they put together some supplies in there. And then they put in gospel tracts and a John and Romans, I think it is, in Spanish, and they're sending it down into some areas in Central and South America. And they're being distributed to help people out. So there's some things in there that provide them some help, but it also has the gospel message in there and a copy of the John and Romans or something in Spanish. So they're putting that stuff in there, and they're not doing it in order to be saved. They're doing it because they're saved.
Amen.
You know,
I visited a church a couple weekends ago, I seen my niece get baptized, and it was pretty, it's a Calvinist church, mega church type deal, big rock concert at the beginning. What I found interesting was how they were clapping for like every little thing, and every person that was introduced to hit applause. And the preaching was right out of various modern versions. They posted up on a big screen. The 6 people got baptized, and I only heard 2 real confessions of faith. Where one being my niece, she's like, I realized I'm a sinner, and then I need the Lord Jesus Christ. And one other woman said that she realized she was a sinner and going to hell and she needed to be saved. She called on the name of the Lord. The others gave a testimony of, well, my friend said, this is a great community, so I'm just thankful to be here type.
yeah.
And I was like listening and just paying attention to every little detail, because I don't really get to visit a lot of different churches. I just stick to my own church.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of genuinely saved people in these churches. They just don't really know any different, because I used to go to churches like that years ago. But over time, I realized there's something not right.
Well, there's even some genuinely born again churches or people in some of these
Sure.
churches like United Church of Christ, and even in some Catholic churches and
Sure.
things where they've gotten saved somewhere along the line in spite of that church, or maybe they got saved somewhere outside of that church, and they were brought into this church. They just didn't know any better, or they got saved, they moved somewhere or whatever, and they were the only church around, and they said, well, bad church is better than no church. And so they started going because it was the only one around. And a lot of times what happens in those situations is they hear things and they interpret it based on what the Bible says, when the person saying those things in some of those churches means something totally different.
I mean, that's a true statement what you just said. A bad church is better than no church. I don't believe that.
Yeah, some people do.
Bad information's worse.
I would not.
More information is better than bad
I mean,
information.
now, keep in mind, no church is a perfect church. Every church has its flaws. And, but what I'm getting at is in terms of bad theology, there are people who are King James only who will go to a church that's not King James only, and they'll say, well, it's the only church around that's even close to being a decent church. Their theology is good, they're just off on the Bible. And so they will go there and they will justify whatever the reason is. And there are some people who believe in sound biblical theology, and they'll go to a church that doesn't believe that anybody goes to hell, doesn't believe that they have to be born again, doesn't believe that, any number of things. But they'll go there because it has a semblance of Christianity, and they'll tell themselves this is better than nothing. Well, sometimes nothing is better than something. It's just like, well, the only thing I have to drink is water laced with a little bit of arsenic. Well, I guess it's better than nothing.
Well, yeah, and the good report was they were lifting up the Lord Jesus Christ.
Mhm. Yeah, and so some churches, depending on the level of where they deviate from the Word of God, where they deviate from sound theology, there are some things that you can tolerate, but at the same time, there are some things that should be intolerable. For instance, if the church denies that Jesus is God manifest in the flesh, then that would be an intolerable church. You would be better off staying home reading your Bible on Sunday morning than going there.
Those
If
are
the
Korean
church,
Presbyterians that are legitimately Christians, it's
Yeah.
just,
if the
it's
church,
such a language barrier there at times, it's.
but I'm gonna say if they denied that that anybody will go to hell, well, that would be a bad, intolerable thing. If they denied the Bible is the Word of God, that would be an intolerable thing, because how do you know anything about God except for the Bible? And so there are certain things.
What church just had a split?
Methodist.
The Methodists.
Yeah, they're in the
It-
process.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
in the process.
Yeah, because
Part of the reason is in Africa, the Methodist churches are very conservative, and in Europe and North America, they're very liberal. And rather than fight it out and everything, they're looking at somewhat of an amiable split. But I'm sure we'll have some problems as they get, work out the details. But it's same thing's happening with the Anglican Church.
Yeah.
The Anglican Church in Africa is largely fairly conservative. And with both the Anglicans and the Methodists, the African church or churches are growing in number than the European and North American churches.
you're getting all the Muslim converts.
Well, that and the fact that because they're more conservative, there's more people going to them. Whereas in North America and Europe, because they're so liberal, people are departing from them. They're shrinking.
And the Lutherans.
And the Lutherans,
They
same sort of
divided
thing.
already several
Yeah.
times over.
Well, they're corporate headquarters of each denomination, that's what's creating this animosity.
Well, yeah,
It's-
and see, that's one of the problems with denominations, because you had the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church started changing its doctrine. Catholic means universal, and so some of the group in the Catholic Church, most notably the Eastern wing of it, they said, well, we can't go along with them, and they separated, and that became, depending on who you talk to, the Catholics call it, I think, the Great Schism or something, but they became known as the Orthodox churches. And the reason they went with the name Orthodox is because they said we're remaining true to the Orthodox faith. Then later on, when the Protestant Reformation took place, you had churches that protested against the Catholic doctrines that they said was contrary to the Scripture, and so they became known as Protestants, protesters. And then they said, we want to reform the church, so hence they were called reformers as well. The Reformation, the Protestant Reformation.
The Bible doesn't teach this, it's come from my view.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that these were people within the Catholic Church that protested and wanted Reformation. So they ended up being forced one way or another out of the Catholic Church. And so they set up their own denominations, Lutherans, eventually the Church of England, the Reformed Church, the Presbyterian Church, the Congregationalist churches. And then some of them went through that again. And you go back to the formation of the Catholic Church in the 4th century, because in the 1st century, this was their guidance, the Bible. And we're got 2nd century, that was their guidance. But by the time you got into the 3rd century, people were adding to it quite a bit. And that led to the formation of the Roman Catholic Church by the
I
4th
was just going
century.
to suggest, that sounds like the Roman Catholic Church.
But essentially, the 1st, 2nd century churches, largely, there were notable exceptions, but largely, basically believed and taught what we believe and teach today. That's why it's easier to be a Baptist than to be a Catholic or a Lutheran or Presbyterian or something. To be a Baptist, all you have to do is open up the book and say, well, this is what it means. But to be in some of these denominations, you have to learn the right way to interpret it. because it doesn't really mean what it
So that's
says.
why they have their cemeteries. I mean,
Yeah.
cemeteries, I'm sorry.
And that's a process of learning how to interpret it. Whereas the Baptist position, which goes back to the first century, was you read the Bible, you know, they didn't have newspapers back then, but you read the Bible essentially the way you would read the newspaper. If the plain sense makes common sense, seek no other sense, is how the saying goes. It basically means what it says. Now, we know that there's poetic language in there. We know there's analogies and metaphors and proverbs and things like that. And we understand that. But likewise, if I pick up a newspaper, if I just pick up a book and start reading it, you know, I read the book and it makes the plain sense makes common sense. That's the way you take it. But if it says, and the dog roared the kitten roared like a lion. Well, you're not going to think that this little kitten was actually sounding like a lion because it said like a. That means this is illustrative. And so we would now know that like a lion means this kitten made a real loud, meow or something.
But doesn't have the power of the lion, right?
Yeah. The kitten
That's like
pounced
a-
down like an eagle swooping down with its talons. Well, the kitten doesn't have talons. And it doesn't fly, but it would give the opinion it came down suddenly from above, like an eagle would attack. And talons are sharp, and they're analogous to the kitten's little prickly claws. And so we understand what metaphor is, and we understand what illustrative language is. Because you get people out there in these other churches, they say, you don't understand, you take everything literally, therefore you must mean that we have to take the metaphors literally. No, we don't, because they're metaphorical. But they have to take even the literal stuff figuratively and interpret according to their system there. So you guys gotta get going
6
here.
o'clock shift.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and pray then, since you guys get going, so we'll go ahead and pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, I want to thank you again for the time we could enjoy together here tonight. For each one that's here, bless, watch over us as we go out, and again, with the supposed to be winter storm coming through, we just pray keep people safe on the roads. And again, thank you for a good night tonight. Bless the day tomorrow, and especially bless the day on Sunday for your glory. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.
And you want
Good
your
to see you all.
container?
Yeah, I'll get it.
And thanks for the cookies. Appreciate that.
Oh, did you make the raisin ones?
Yeah.
They were good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Nice and flaky.
Yeah. But yeah, so you look at these things in the different churches that arose, and they started dividing over different interpretations.
Now it's just mass confusion.
And changing doctrines. People say, well, where are all these denominations come from? Well, they're all developed from, people say, well, I disagree with what you had to say. The Protestants came as a split off the Catholic Church. The Orthodox came as a split off the Catholic Church. Good night.
Good night.
And but I was sort of almost tongue in cheek, but there's a lot more truth to it than you think. You realize the Catholics came as a split off from the Baptists, except there was no the Baptist Church. There were Baptist churches.
It was Baptist doctrine.
But when the Catholic Church came into being, universal church, meaning all of the churches were one unit under their umbrella.
And what's his name? Who was that?
Constantine?
I thought it was her.
I think so. The Roman emperor at the time.
Yeah.
Where he gave if you're gonna have a church, it's gotta be this church here. And
I think it was 313 AD. It was
Yeah,
Constantine,
and he
yes.
marched the Roman army through the Tiberias River or something like that. He
Yeah,
said, you're all
Tiberius.
baptized.
Yeah, forced baptism.
Yeah, but he himself did not receive baptism until he was on his deathbed or something like that. But that was partly because they were starting to embrace some false teaching even then, that baptism washed away sins.
Well,
I
Paul
mean-
talks about it all through the first century. They had
Mhm.
Gnostics and false doctrines creeping in.
Well, and see, that's why in the second century, you still had pretty sound churches, because they
Abstaining
would
from
say,
these
they would say, well,
yeah.
I was taught by John, and John specifically said no to that. Well, I remember Paul, when he said that, and then you had people who said, the guy who taught me, he sat under Paul, or he sat under, Apollos, or he sat under John, or he sat under Luke. He knew them personally. And so you were still pretty close to the originals.
Right.
But by the time you start getting, you know, a couple generations away, it's just like somebody said one time, you think about it, how many people know who their parents are? Most everybody. How many people know who your grandparents are? Pretty good.
I don't know.
How many people know who your great-grandparents are?
Me,
Can you name the name of each of your great-grandparents? Okay. How about your great-great-grandparents? But you see what I'm saying?
They didn't even speak
You
English.
start
My
losing,
great-grandparents.
you lose them. Real quick, within just a couple of generations, we're losing things that the generation or two ahead of us knew and took for granted.
Well, that's why we have, go get your DNA, and talk about genealogies,
Yeah,
now they wanna bring it all back.
23 and me or
Well,
something.
No,
Yeah.
you're not this or that, you're this, that, and that.
Well, good night. We're gonna sign off here, so take care. Good night. God bless. So.
Why'd you try that piece of garbage?
Thanks, Pastor.
Well, thank you. God bless.